Imagine owning a printing company where a humid day can ruin your product. Not because the ink is bad, and not because one of the machines broke, but because the paper itself is changing size. That was a problem at a Brooklyn printing plant in 1902. When the weather got humid, the paper absorbed the moisture, expanded slightly, and threw off the color printing process. Tiny shifts meant that the layer of colored ink would no longer line up correctly, turning expensive prints into waste. So the company brought in a young engineer to figure out how to control the air inside the building. He wasn't trying to make workers comfortable. He was trying to stop paper from acting weird. But the machine he built solved one of the problems that would eventually change how America lived, worked, and built cities. Because once people realized they could control the air indoors, the country outside those walls started to change too. Chapter 1. Before, you could just turn it on. Before air conditioning, summer didn't just make people uncomfortable. It set the schedule. People woke up early because the middle of the day could be brutal. They opened windows at night and hoped for a breeze. They sat on the porches because sometimes the porch felt better than the living room. You can still see that old way of living, especially in the houses built before air conditioning was common. Big porches, tall ceilings, windows placed strategically so air could move throughout the house. Those weren't just style choices, they were the cooling system. A porch gave you shade. Tall ceilings gave the hot air somewhere to rise. Windows on opposite sides of the house gave you a chance at a cross breeze. And shade trees mattered because stopping sunlight before it hit the walls was a lot easier than trying to cool the room after it was already hot. That's why older homes in the South can feel so different from newer homes. They were built around the fact that weather was going to get inside, whether you liked it or not. And then there was humidity. Heat's bad enough, but humidity takes it to a whole nother level. Your body cools itself by sweating. When sweat evaporates, it takes heat away from your skin. But when the air is already full of moisture, that sweat doesn't evaporate so well. So you're still sweating and still hot, and your clothes are sticking to you. That's why a humid 90-degree day can feel so much worse than a dry 100-degree day. For people, it was miserable. For factories, it could be expensive. Paper changed shape. Cotton threads could behave differently. Food would spoil faster. A machine might be working perfectly, but the air around it could still wreck the product. That was the problem at Sackett-Wilms, a printing plant in Brooklyn. Color printing depends on putting several different colors on the same sheet of paper, one layer at a time. If humidity made the paper swell even a little bit in between passes, the colors would no longer line up. And what should have been a clean, crisp-looking image became a blurry, expensive mistake. So Willis Carrier got to work. He helped turn refrigeration and ventilation into a system that can control indoor conditions, and on purpose. His machine pushed air across chilled coils. When the air cooled, moisture condensed out of it. That gave the printing plant something it had never had before: stable humidity. And that's the key to this whole story. Air conditioning isn't really about making the air cold. It's about controlling the air. A modern system does two big things at once. It pulls heat out of the air and it pulls moisture out of the air. Inside the house, warm air moves across a cold coil. The refrigeration inside that coil absorbs the heat. Moisture collects on the outside of the coil and drains away. Then the refrigerant carries the heat outside, where the system dumps it in the air behind your house. The outside unit isn't making cold air. It's taking heat from in your living room and tossing it into the backyard like an unwanted house guest.
Come on! Bonnie, how do you keep getting back in?
I'm a drunk. I don't know nothing about how I do anything. Whoa!
Carrier's early system was huge, expensive, and built for a factory. Nobody was putting one of these bad boys in a bedroom window in 1902. But it proved that the weather outside didn't have to control conditions inside. And at first, that mattered most to business. Printers textile mills and food companies could make more consistent products when the air stopped changing by the hour. But then, people started to notice something else. A building with controlled air wasn't just better for paper, it was better for people too. And once Americans experienced that, they weren't going to be satisfied with sweating through endless summers again and again. Chapter 2. When cold air became a reason to leave the house. For most people, air conditioning didn't first show up in their home. It showed up somewhere they wanted to go. Movie theaters figured that out early. Think about a hot summer evening. Before most houses had air conditioning, the windows would be open. The fan is doing its best, and the bedroom is still warm. And your choices are basically to sit there, go outside, or find someplace cooler. Then there's a movie theater. It's dark, it's comfortable, you get a movie, you get a seat, and cold air blowing throughout the building. That was a pretty good deal. And by the 1920s, theaters were advertising their cold air almost as hard as they were advertising the film. A theater wasn't just selling tickets, it was selling relief from the brutal summer. For a lot of families, that was their first real experience of being inside a building that felt cool while the outside world was roasting. Stores caught on to this. A department store that stayed cool gave people a reason to stay longer. You weren't just running in, buying one thing, and then escaping back outside. You could walk around, meet somebody for lunch, and maybe spend more money than you meant to. Cool air became part of the experience. Offices changed in the same way, although nobody was exactly taking a family trip to enjoy the air conditioning at work. Before cooling, offices depended on open windows and natural airflow. That limited to how buildings could be laid out. People sitting in the middle of a big floor needed some way to breathe and cool down. Once buildings had mechanical cooling, architects could start designing things differently. Floors could get bigger. Windows didn't have to open. Buildings could be sealed up from the outside and kept at a steady temperature. Air conditioning didn't invent the skyscraper. Steel, elevators, and electric lighting had already taken care of that. But still, it made the modern office tower possible. A tall building made mostly of glass might look great from the street, but without cooling, it turns into a greenhouse. You've got sunlight coming in, people inside, and equipment running, all with very little natural airflow. That's a lot of heat stacking up inside. Air conditioning made it possible for a building to be treated almost like a machine. The structure held it up, its utilities kept running, and the HVAC system kept it usable. Hospitals needed the same kind of control for a different reason. Patients need relief from the heat, and medical equipment needs stable conditions. Then, World War II pushed the technology even forward. Factories were running around the clock. Manufacturing improved cooling equipment and controls because everything had to work harder and last longer. After the war, those improvements came home. Window air conditioners became something regular families could buy. They weren't cheap at first. They gave people a way to cool a bedroom or a living room without turning the whole house into a construction project. You could sleep without waking up drenched in sweat. You could control a baby's room. You could give an elder parent some relief when a big old heat wave was rolling through. And once central air conditioning started showing up in new suburban homes, builders changed the way they designed houses. The big porch stopped being as necessary. Cross breezes mattered less. Windows became something you could open when you wanted to, not something you had to keep open just to survive a day in July. Then came the shopping mall. The enclosed mall was basically an indoor town where the weather had been told it wasn't invited. It could be 98 degrees outside, pouring rain, or freezing cold. But inside, people could shop. They could grab a bite to eat, maybe walk around, go to a movie and hang out with friends, all inside the same steady temperature. It showed what air conditioning had become. It wasn't just a machine for factories anymore. It had become part of how the Americans spent their time. And once people got used to that kind of control indoors, they started building bigger lives in places where summer used to be harder to live. Chapter 3. The machine that helped move America south. Air conditioning didn't create the South or the Southwest. Those places already had people, history, and opportunity long before anybody had a thermostat on the wall. But air conditioning changed what was possible at scale. It made a hot place easier to work in year-round. It made a humid place easier to sleep in. And it made it a lot easier for businesses to build offices, hospitals, stores, and neighborhoods without treating summer like a yearly emergency. That mattered in places like Florida, Texas, and Arizona, along with many more. By the middle of the 20th century, those parts of the country had room to grow. New highways connected places that had once felt far apart. Expanding jobs brought people in, and companies wanted new places to build. Air conditioning didn't cause all of that, but it made all of it easier. Take Phoenix. In 1950, it was much smaller than it is today. The desert was still the desert, and summer was still hot enough to be dangerous. But as air conditioning became normal in daily life, the city grew in ways that would have been much harder than before. The same happened in places like Houston and in Orlando. People could work inside, families could sleep, hospitals could run safely, and new neighborhoods could spread outward because a house no longer had to be built around catching every possible breeze. Air conditioning let Americans separate where they lived from what the weather demanded. That's a big deal. For most of history, climate put hard limits on daily life. You could live in a hot place, of course. People had been doing that for a long time, but your house, work, and daily schedule had to bend around the heat. Now the heat could stay outside, and that changed the outlook of the country, as well as the economy. A huge amount of modern American life happens in buildings that need controlled air. Offices, hospitals, schools, and many more. Then there are data centers. A data center is basically a building full of computers, doing the quiet work behind modern life. More and more of the things we use every day depend on computer servers, and servers make heat, a lot of heat. Almost every bit of electricity that goes into a computer eventually turns into some form of heat. Put thousands of computers in one building, and cooling stops being about comfort. It becomes part of keeping the machine alive. Without cooling, those servers slow down, shut down, or break. So in a weird way, air conditioning is now part of the internet. The technology that started because paper was changing size in a Brooklyn printing plant now helps keep information moving all over the world. But there's a downside. Air conditioning takes a lot of electricity, especially on the hottest afternoons of the year. That's why the power grid gets stressed during heat waves. Millions of people come home, set the thermostat lower, turn on appliances, and ask the grid to do its hardest work all at the exact same time. We need cooling, and in many parts of the country, it's not just nice to have. During extreme heat, it can keep people safe. But we also need to cool smarter. Better insulation helps a house hold on to cool air longer. More efficient systems like heat pumps use less power. Cleaner electricity like nuclear power helps keep people cool without making the problem worse. The answer isn't to go backwards. Nobody's looking to bring back the days when you had to sleep on the porch because the bedroom was too hot to use. The answer is to keep the comfort air conditioning gave us while getting better at the way we make it. Because at this point, air conditioning isn't just a convenience. It's a part of American infrastructure. It helps people live through heat. It helps businesses operate, and it helps cities grow. And it keeps the digital world from overheating. All because somebody had a problem with printing on some paper. Air conditioning started as a way to keep one printing plant from wasting paper, but it ended up changing the country around it. It changed the way houses were built. It gave movie theaters a reason to fill seats in the summer, and it helped modern buildings keep working through heat that would have slowed everything down. and it helped millions of Americans live in places that used to demand a completely different way of life. So the next time your air conditioner kicks on and you barely notice it, think about how strange that really is. A machine built to stop paper from acting weird became one of the things that reshapes where and how Americans live. This has been Fun Facts with Josh. I'm your host, Josh. Thanks for watching, and until next time, you stay cool.